good evening, or should I say, good. Whenever you accidentally wake up in a bed made of straw, next to a clay jug of tepid ale, and realize with growing horror that you're in the year 1500 and there is no alarm clock. No iPhone, no bedside lamp, no 700 AM. Radar tone followed by your desperate swipe at a glowing rectangle. Just the cold, the chickens, and a window made of oily parchment that lets in enough light to blind you but not enough to tell the time. You sit up, rubbing your eyes with the back of a hand that's suddenly dirty and smells faintly of wood smoke and pickled herring. You've time-traveled not to a castle, sorry, but to a typical village in England or Flanders or rural Bavaria, where the day begins not with a beep, but with a baa, a cock-a-doodle-doo, or a mildly panicked pig escaping its pen. Welcome to the 1500s, a time when people had to wake up the old-fashioned way by accident, obligation, or because the sun poked them in the eyeballs. There's no snooze button, but you do have Marjorie, your neighbor and local gossip, who enjoys shouting about her chickens at the break of dawn. She also believes you might be a witch, but only on Tuesdays. Today, your body wakes you naturally. Your bladder makes a strong argument. So does the cold, seeping up through the mattress of hay and reminding you that central heating is still 400 years away. You groan. You stretch. You try to find your boots in the dark, but instead step on a cat. It doesn't forgive you. There's no clock on the wall. The church bell hasn't rung yet, but the village is already murmuring to life. Somewhere, a pot clangs. Somewhere else, a baby is screaming. And above it all, a rooster crows loud, proud, and annoyingly punctual. This is how people in 1500 woke up through a symphony of environmental cues, bodily needs, and community noise. Your body knew when to rise because it had to. The day didn't wait for you to press a button, it just started, and you either kept up or got trampled by it. You shuffle outside, blink at the gray morning sky, and see your neighbor's boy trudging toward the town square with a sack of bread. He nods, half asleep. His entire family got up an hour ago to fire the communal oven. You've already missed the good spots. Further down the path, the monastery bell tower looms. It hasn't rung yet today. Sunrise prayers will start at first light, which isn't an exact science, but close enough for monks who never oversleep because they're too terrified of God's schedule. You'll learn soon that in this world, time isn't about numbers, it's about rhythms, the sun, the seasons, the sound of carts, the patterns of animals. People woke up because they had to, not because they wanted to. Wanting had nothing to do with it. You either rose, or your job, your bread, your social reputation, and possibly your goats vanished. Still, some clever souls had tricks. Maybe you tied a string to your toe and attached it to a burning candle so that, when the wax melted just enough, it dropped something heavy on your foot. Or maybe you relied on a servant, or your angry spouse, or the local church bell, which doubled as both wake-up call and existential reminder of sin. And yet, despite all of this, people still managed to get up. They did the plowing, they made the cheese, they served kings, fought wars, scribbled letters, painted masterpieces, and gossiped about Marjorie's chickens. All without alarms, calendars, or scheduling apps. You take a deep breath. The air smells like wet thatch, sheep, and hope. The rooster crows again, louder this time. You consider retaliating with a slingshot, but remember that poultry is expensive, and emotions are not a legal defense. Instead, you stretch your arms, step into your muddy boots, and start your day not because an alarm told you to, but because the world did. And tomorrow the same, unless you invent the snooze button. In which case, congratulations. You just started the Renaissance. You awaken the next morning, if you can call it morning, since nobody's quite sure what time it is and nobody owns a wristwatch. You're not awakened by a digital chime, a Spotify playlist, or a barking phone notification about your 7:30 Grind Starts Now calendar alert. Instead, you wake because your face is cold. Not just, ooh, the blanket slipped cold. We're talking my nostrils are now small icicles, and I may never feel my toes again cold. That's one of the first and most powerful natural alarms in 1500 temperature. There's no central heating, no insulation, and no fluffy duvet rated for Scandinavian winters. There's just straw, wool, your own body heat, and the gentle frost of atmospheric betrayal. You huddle closer under your coarse blanket, but it's no use. The warmth is gone, and so soon are you. Awake. Your second alarm arrives shortly after light. Not the warm, gentle glow of a bedside lamp. No, you're woken by the vicious, unfiltered stab of dawnlight squeezing through your oiled parchment window or open slats in the barn wall. In most households, windows were either non-existent or covered with cloth, horn, or bits of flattened animal bladder. These materials were great at keeping the cold out and terrible at keeping the sun from shining directly into your dreams like a heavenly interrogation. And once light entered the room, it didn't just illuminate, it activated everything. The rooster outside starts his one-man concert. The cows moo. Someone's child cries. Someone's other child cries because the first one cried. Chickens flap. Pots clank. Your neighbor coughs like he's starting a rebellion. It's 1500. You do not sleep in. Sleep is something peasants hoard like firewood. If you get 6 uninterrupted hours, you're either a monk, a corpse, or royalty. Maybe all three. And speaking of monks, out in the distance, you hear the solemn peal of a church bell, yet another natural alarm. It's not marking the hour, it's calling people to prime, the first of many canonical prayer times. Monks, nuns, and the occasionally pious townsfolk align their entire day around these bells. For the rest of the village, these sounds are less about divine devotion and more about knowing it's time to get your pants on and milk something. You shuffle out of bed, more straw than mattress, less mattress than haystack, and the floorboards creak a greeting beneath your bare feet. You step outside. Boom, sunlight in your eyes. Not a sunrise, mind you, just gray daylight. Because actual sunrises depend on the time of year. And we're in a world where time isn't measured in minutes, it's measured in tasks. You hear carts creaking. You smell firewood burning. Your neighbor is already yelling about goats again. You check your to-do list, which is carved into your sense of daily panic, not written on a phone. It includes: feed livestock, avoid plague, remember where you buried the turnips, don't die. You start with feeding the animals. As you pass your flock of unimpressed sheep, you marvel at how every creature around you knows what time it is without needing a clock. Birds are chirping, cows are pacing. Even the dog has assumed its daily position of looking vaguely disappointed in you. This is a world governed by circadian rhythms, not alarms. Your body, after a while, learns the pattern of light and dark. Without screens, candles are precious and expensive, and the fire is often saved for cooking or heating, not ambiance. So you naturally rise with the sun and wind down with the dark. If you go to bed at 8 p.m., waking at 4 or 5 a.m. is just how things work. But nature isn't just light and noise, it's also hunger. You skipped dinner last night because your cousin dropped your last loaf of bread into the well. You wake up now not from dreams but from the distant, yearning ache of an empty stomach. Hunger in 1500 isn't a polite request, it's a bodily uprising. Your body doesn't care what the time is. It wants gruel, and it wants it now. So let's review. Cold kicked you out of bed. Light stabbed you awake. Roosters, bells, and livestock played backup vocals. And hunger lit the final fire under your medieval behind. All this before the invention of snooze. You sigh, stretch your back, and step fully into the daylight, where your day of hard labor and minor existential dread awaits. But hey, you're awake. And really, that's the miracle. Tomorrow, you'll wake up again. Not because your phone buzzed, but because everything else did. You're barely awake, still blinking out the last scraps of dream involving flying pigs and alarm clocks made of cheese when the next wave of your historical awakening hits bells. Big ones, loud ones, repeated ones, ringing out across the damp rooftops like God tapping snooze on your behalf. Welcome to the monastic alarm system, the medieval world's closest thing to a citywide wake-up call, provided not by Apple, but by Augustine. You peer across the village and spot it, the local church or monastery tower, tall, slightly crooked, with a bell that swings like it's having a midlife crisis. It tolls in long, solemn clangs, announcing that it's time for prime, the first structured prayer of the day for monks and clergy. Depending on the season, this might happen at 5 a.m., 6 a.m., or whatever time Brother Cedric stops snoring. Even if you're not a monk, the bell rules your life. The church bell marked time before wristwatches, iCal, and productivity apps. It told you when to get up, when to plow, when to stop, when to pray, and when to fear eternal damnation, usually around Vespers. You hear a chant beginning in the distance, Gregorian, soft and rolling. Monks inside the abbey are lining up in the cold, shivering through wool robes and singing prayers in Latin with a devotion that's both admirable and slightly terrifying. And in this society that rhythm spreads outward, if you live in town, the bell means it's time to open your shop, roll out the market cart, or get your butt to work before the local guildmaster drops by and passive-aggressively blesses you for sloth. If you're a farmhand or laborer, it means your boss is awake, and if he's awake, you'd better be. If you're nobility, the bell is ambient noise, and you'll rise when your servant brings hot broth and subtly threatens to gossip about you at court if you don't get up. But for most of the population, bells meant structure and chaos. See, timekeeping in the 1500s wasn't universal. There were no synchronized clocks. Even if your town had a mechanical clock tower, and that's a big if, it might be off by 15 minutes. And no one would care. Time was local, fluid, and vibe-based. So bells were less about precision and more about general vibes, which in this case meant stop sleeping and start threshing. The monastic day was carved into 8 canonical hours, each marked by bells. Matins after midnight. Lauds around sunrise. Prime first hour of daylight. Terce mid-morning. Sext midday. None mid-afternoon. Vespers sunset. Compline before bed. Imagine if your day were divided by public notifications that demanded you pause to reflect or chant, regardless of whether you were in the middle of shearing a sheep or crying over spilled mead. These bells didn't just organize monastic life, they became the heartbeat of entire communities. People learned to live by their sounds. The bells told the butcher when to sharpen his cleaver, the cobbler when to start stitching, and the housewife when to roll out the dough and pretend she wasn't eavesdropping on the priest's Latin mispronunciations. You walk past the church and peer in. Rows of candles flicker. A sleepy acolyte yawns during Psalm 119. You realize that, in a world without alarms, God became the clockmaker, and the monks became his very tired timekeepers. But not every place had monks. In smaller villages, you might have just one priest, an overworked, mildly grumpy man who rings the bell himself, then rushes through the mass to get back to his chickens. Yet even his single daily bell, crooked and late, was enough to nudge people from their beds. And in cities, bell towers rang across the skyline like a symphony of sanctified shouting. Each monastery or church had its own schedule. On feast days, the bells rang longer. On fast days, shorter. And on Judgment Day, presumably louder. You stand still and count the chimes echoing through the morning fog. Somewhere, someone just realized they're late. Somewhere else, a baker just began his kneading. A carpenter wipes sawdust from his eyes. A student reaches for a quill. A beggar pulls his cloak tighter and steps into the street. And you're fully awake. Because no one sleeps through church bells. Not in the 1500s. Not even you. Your eyes are open. Your feet are cold. And your ears are under siege. Because while the church bells might be the most organized alarm system of the 1500s, they are by no means the only one. Far from it. This morning, you're awakened not by monks or sunlight, but by a chicken with a superiority complex, somewhere just below your window, which, again, is made of something halfway between fabric and bladder. A rooster belts out a shriek so piercing you briefly suspect Satan has entered a bird. Welcome to the natural alarm clock of rural Europe, the cockcrow. It's loud, it's repetitive, and, contrary to popular belief, it does not only crow at dawn. No. This feathered banshee will crow at 3 a, 5 a, 9:07 a.m., and sometimes just to remind you he exists and that you're not. In the 1500s, roosters weren't just breakfast mascots, they were reliable, annoying, and entirely unavoidable. Every home with a scrap of land had one, or two, or 12. And unlike church bells, which followed a schedule, roosters followed their hearts in the moonlight. But it wasn't just the chickens. No, the entire village was part of the morning noise symphony. You step outside and are immediately met by a baby wailing because it missed second sleep. A woman yelling at her husband for dropping a bucket into the well. A dog barking at a goose, who is hissing at a cat, who is not emotionally invested. A neighbor loudly coughing because medieval mornings are 80% flamme. A cartwheel squeaking like it's reenacting a tragedy. This is not peace. This is communal chaos, and it is your wake-up call. In many towns, there were also village gongs, watchmen's horns, or town criers, official or semi-official noisemakers whose job included waking people up, warning them about fires, or announcing when the bread was ready. In some places, a bell or horn would sound from the market square just before sunrise to rouse vendors. In others, a night watchman would literally shout the hour while stomping past your house like an extremely confident pigeon. 4 o'clock, and all is well, he cries, disturbing every sleep cycle within 50 yards. You whisper a prayer for him to stub his toe. He does. You smile. In certain Mediterranean cities, people also use drums, cymbals, or the cheerful sound of donkeys wearing bells to alert neighborhoods that it was time to get moving. These weren't alarms. These were audio-visual riots designed by culture and necessity. And if you lived in a fishing village, oh, forget it. You were up hours before dawn. Boats had to be out at sea long before the first light, so families would wake each other up in shifts. And nothing screams pleasant morning like someone opening your door and shouting, "The herring wait for no man." Inside the home, family members became alarm systems. Parents woke children. Children woke parents, and the family goat often joined in. If you were a servant or apprentice, waking up late could mean losing your position or worse, being forced to clean the chamber pot with yesterday's bread crust. For wealthier households, servants were tasked with waking the master. Usually this meant lightly knocking, gently calling their name, or, in desperate cases, standing uncomfortably close and clearing their throat until the air vibrated with judgment. Some servants even developed techniques like sprinkling rose water, opening curtains, or letting a hungry lapdog into the bed. Because nothing gets a nobleman up faster than a Pomeranian licking his eyebrow. And let's not forget, walls were thin, homes were packed with people. Privacy was a myth. If anyone was awake, you were awake. You try to close your eyes again, but someone has started playing the lute, badly. A child is singing what may be a hymn or a warning. And a goose, probably the same one from yesterday, is staging what appears to be a full-scale rebellion against your front steps. You sit up. You're awake. Not because you wanted to be, because the entire village made sure you were. In 1500, waking up wasn't a solitary affair. It was a group project, one that involved livestock, family, local officials, and environmental hostility. You didn't set an alarm. You lived inside one. Tomorrow, perhaps you'll be woken by the town bell, or the pigs, or a concerned friar with a strong singing voice and no sense of pitch. But for now, you're up, and the village is up, and the day has begun whether you like it or not. You'd better find that goose. You wake this morning not to the rooster or the bells or the geese, although they're still around, loudly living their best poultry lives. No. Today you are awoken by something much more medievally intimate. A human elbow in your ribs. You groan. Your eyes flutter open. You see a shape looming in the half-light, someone dressed in linen, holding a candle stub, and staring at you with the intensity of a minor demon or a very committed valet. "Sir," they whisper, "it is time to rise." You roll over. The elbow returns, this time more direct. This is what happens when you're wealthy in 1500. You don't rely on natural alarms. You employ them. You have a human being whose job it is to wake you up softly, gently, and only with moderate violence. This was common practice for nobles, scholars, and anyone wealthy enough to own more than one spoon. Your personal wake-up assistant might be a valet, a page boy, or a very exhausted maid, depending on your station. Their job to creep into your chamber before sunrise, bring warm water for washing, perhaps light the fire, and most importantly, get you out of bed before the entire household descends into chaos. They might try subtle methods first, pulling back the curtains which, to be fair, are mostly for decoration and status, not actual warmth. Whispering your name like a haunted prayer. Clinking pewter dishes. Gently tapping your shoulder with a damp cloth. But if you're a known sleeper, they escalate: candlestick rattling, floorboard stomping, sudden Latin. One desperate servant might even release your pet dog, trained to lick your face until consciousness arrives. Nobility is, in many ways, just extra layers of inconvenience wrapped in silk. If you're a student, say, at a university in Paris or Bologna, you may have a roommate who's responsible for waking you, likely through the classic combination of yelling and throwing a small Bible. And if you're an apprentice, living in a merchant's house or blacksmith's loft, you'll be woken up by your master. And let's be honest, he has zero patience. You're jarred awake with phrases like, "Up, or I'll feed your shoes to the fire." The anvil waits for no one. If you're not hammering by sunrise, you're not eating by sundown. In medieval cities, especially during the growth of guild culture, punctuality wasn't just personal, it was professional. A late apprentice was seen as lazy, dishonorable, or probably possessed. And in towns with public order laws, you could be fined or even whipped for shirking your morning duties. Some masters had rotating wake-up duties, where older apprentices were tasked with waking younger ones. This created a ladder of cranky teenagers yelling at each other before dawn, which, if you listen closely, is probably what inspired the invention of coffee centuries later. But servants weren't only for waking nobles. In wealthy monasteries, certain monks had the role of bell ringer or porter, whose job it was to ensure the rest of the brothers rose on time for matins and prime. Imagine one sleepy friar whose job it is to wake all the other sleepy friars. That's monastic karma. And sometimes, especially in larger households, alarm chains developed. The cook wakes the kitchen boy. The kitchen boy wakes the scullery maid. The scullery maid wakes the butler, who wakes the valet, who wakes the lord, who complains that no one brought honeyed milk. The valet sighs, and the whole thing starts again tomorrow. The effectiveness of this system depended entirely on how much the bottom person feared the top person. But what if you were the bottom person? Well, if you overslept, you didn't just get scolded. You risked losing your position, your coin, your roof over your head, and if you were an orphaned apprentice, possibly your only chance at a trade. In 1500, waking up wasn't optional. It was survival. And the alarm was sometimes a human being with a stick. You rub your eyes, yawn, and glance at the flickering candle stub near your bed. Your valet has already opened the shutters. Pale light creeps in. Someone in the hall drops a tray. Someone else is reciting Psalm 5 at an uncomfortable volume. You are awake, not because you want to be, because you were made to be. And tomorrow, if you oversleep, there's a goat with your name on it and a very grumpy master with a wooden spoon. Best not to press snooze. You awake this morning with a start, but there are no bells, no rooster, no monk, no goat, just a distinct tapping on your window, rhythmic and unrelenting. You sit up, startled, peering through the foggy pane of 16th century glass or, let's be honest, oiled cloth. Tap, tap, tap. Outside, silhouetted against the gray dawn, is a thin figure in a hat too big for its head, holding a long stick with a knob at the end. It pokes the window again, then moves on without a word. You've just been woken by a knocker-up. Yes, that was a real job. Though the role flourished more famously in the 18th and 19th centuries, especially during the early Industrial Revolution, its roots likely go back to the 1500s, when towns began to grow. Shift work became more rigid, and people no longer lived within direct earshot of monastic bells or church towers. Someone needed to make sure people got up on time, especially in tight-packed urban areas where neighbors worked in tanneries, workshops, or proto-factories that didn't tolerate lateness. That someone was often an elderly man with a pole, a sharp-eyed widow with a bundle of pebbles, or, in elite cases, a servant with a ladder and unreasonably long arms. Knocker-ups were human alarm clocks. You could pay them a small fee, a few farthings a week, and they would stop by your house at the agreed-upon hour and tap on your door, window, or in some cases, roof, to make sure you didn't sleep through your obligations. No batteries, no apps, just punctual humans with sticks. You open your creaky window and look down the street. There they go, tapping away, knock, knock, knock on Mrs. Alderman's shutters, a polite rap on the baker's back door, and a quick stone toss onto the shoemaker's balcony. The town breathes to life one person at a time, awakened by the low-tech persistence of community obligation. Some knocker-ups even had customized tools. Hollow canes to shoot dried peas at upper windows. Weighted cords to tug gently on a string tied to your bedpost. Or, in one delightful case, trained birds that pecked at designated windows. This probably ended in chaos. And they had to be precise. If you asked to be woken at sunrise minus 1 hour, you got exactly that. Not because they had watches, but because they knew the sky, they read the clouds, the bird calls, the light on the cobblestones. They were masters of dawncraft. You might think, why didn't they just use a clock? Well, in 1500 personal clocks were wildly expensive. Sundials not helpful at night. Candle clocks fire hazard. Water clocks great if you have an engineering degree and unlimited patience. So you hired Doris with her tapstick. And here's the twist: who wakes the knocker up? This ancient philosophical riddle has baffled historians, children, and late-night pub philosophers alike. The truth: sometimes they didn't sleep. Knocker-ups were often night watchmen, lamplighters, or people who just didn't require a lot of rest. Sometimes they tag-teamed each other, and sometimes, well, they trusted their own internal alarm, which in 1500 was far more reliable than yours. It was also common for entire families to serve as knockers up, passing the profession down like a recipe or a hereditary cold. You might see a mother knocking windows on one side of the street, while her son takes the alley, and her daughter handles the high-end houses with a longer pole and a reputation for discretion. If you're thinking this sounds like a quaint and lovely profession, consider this: if you didn't wake up, if you slept through the knock, the taps, the pebbles, you still had to pay. After all, they did their job. Your failure to arise was between you and your sleeping habits. As you stretch, you realize this job was born out of urgency and trust. It worked because it had to. There were no do-overs in medieval scheduling. If you missed work, you missed pay. If you missed the market, your produce spoiled. If you missed the town meeting, your neighbor might vote to expand his pig pen onto your property. In short, people helped each other wake up because the cost of not doing so was survival. You nod to the departing figure at the end of the lane. The knocker-up disappears into the mist, stick tapping at her side like the soft punctuation of responsibility. Tomorrow, you may rise with the bells, or the rooster, or the cold. But today, you woke up because someone remembered you asked to be. And that before digital assistants and smart homes is perhaps the most human alarm of all. This time, you don't wake with the sunrise, or the rooster, or even the knock on your window. No. This time, you wake up in the dead middle of the night, your eyes popping open like someone just whispered, "Don't forget the firewood." But no one did. You look around. It's still dark, quiet. The fire has become embers. The rest of the household is asleep, or so you think. And then you hear it, the gentle creak of a floorboard, a soft mutter, a whisper, a flicker of a candle. Someone else is up too. Welcome to segmented sleep, the most underappreciated part of waking up in 1500 and something that almost everyone did. Back then, people didn't usually sleep in one uninterrupted 8-hour block. Instead, most followed a pattern known today as biphasic or segmented sleep. This meant going to bed just after sunset, waking around midnight, staying up for an hour or two, then going back to sleep until dawn. Yes, it was normal to be fully awake at 1:00 a.m., not because of insomnia, but because that was just how sleep worked before streetlights, screens, and 9-to-5 jobs ruined the vibe. This mysterious middle period was often called the watch or first waking. And what did people do during this twilight window? Well, everything. Some prayed, some thought deep thoughts, some tended the fire, checked the animals, or prepared for the coming day. Monks got up to chant. Peasants might repair tools or spin wool. Lovers, tucked under heavy blankets, often took the opportunity for, let's just say, romantically supervised theological discussions. It was a quiet time, a reflective time, a time when the world was still but your brain was gently stirring as if your circadian rhythm said, "Okay, intermission. Stretch your limbs. Check your cows. Maybe journal." In fact, early physicians even recommended this period. Medical texts referred to it as the best time for digestion and contemplation. Some even believed your body naturally passed from first sleep to second sleep with this break in between. It wasn't insomnia, it was intermission. You peek into the adjoining room. Your neighbor is already awake, kneeling in prayer, whispering psalms by candlelight. Across the street, you see another window lit faintly from within. Someone's baking. Someone else is whispering to their goats. One man is out chopping kindling like it's the most natural 2:30 a.m. in the world. In urban areas, this time also had a bit of a shady reputation. Thieves, gamblers, and other night creatures often used the watch to go about their business while everyone else was briefly distracted by dreams or soup. But in most households, it was a productive, private pause an hour or two when the house was quiet and the weight of daily obligation momentarily lifted. And this time was social too. Historical diaries and letters mention midnight chats between spouses, visits to neighbors, even quick meetings at taverns. You read that right people used to go call on neighbors at 1 a.m., exchange gossip, then head back to bed like nothing had happened. Try that today and someone's calling the HOA. Eventually, after you stir the fire and stretch your legs, your eyes begin to droop again. You climb back into bed, wrap yourself in wool and hope, and fall into your second sleep, which usually lasted until dawn's light and Marjorie's second round of goat-based shouting. Segmented sleep wasn't just a quirk of the 1500s, it was a globally observed pattern before industrialization. From medieval Europe to ancient China, from African villages to Arabic scholars' letters, there is evidence that humanity naturally gravitated toward this two-part pattern, especially in long, dark winters where 10 hours of darkness gave people room to breathe, pause, and dream again. Today, if you wake at 2 a.m. and stare at the ceiling, you call it insomnia. In 1500, they called it Tuesday. You roll over, feeling oddly peaceful. There's no pressure to be asleep. There's no schedule to beat. There's no glowing rectangle whispering anxiously about sleep scores. There's just the fire, the dark, and the soft rhythm of a world that understands not everything happens in one stretch, including sleep. You sigh, you smile, and you drift into your second slumber. You wake not to a rooster, not to a servant, not even to a monk dramatically swinging a bell in your general direction, but to a sheep gently nibbling on your toe. Congratulations, you fell asleep in the hayloft again. But it's fine, because you didn't need a clock. Your body already knew. Something in the world whispered, "It's time." And your body answered, "Ugh, fine." Welcome to the natural clocks of the 1500s. No gears, no metal hands, just light, wind, stomach, and the ever-reliable clatter of livestock demanding breakfast. You stumble out of the barn, brushing hay from your hair. The sun is just cresting the horizon, painting the thatched rooftops gold. It's early, but how early you don't know. You don't need to know. You live in a world where time is measured not in minutes but in moments. The cow is mooing, that means the sun is rising. The sparrows are screaming at each other in the hedges mid-morning. The pigs are screaming at each other in the pen, probably lunchtime. In the 1500s, your day was shaped by the rhythms of nature. Not because people were spiritual forest fairies, though some definitely tried, but because they had no choice. The natural world provided a remarkably reliable, if sometimes noisy, schedule. First, there was light. The angle of the sun, the color of the sky, and the direction of the shadows told you everything you needed to know. A farmer could look at the way the morning dew steamed off the fields and say, with eerie confidence, "Best start weeding by the time the shadow hits that stump." And then there was sound. Not just roosters and bells, but the daily animal orchestra that marked the hours. Cattle stirred at dawn. Geese held heated town hall meetings mid-morning. Dogs barked at travelers near noon. And crickets' night shift. Animals were such precise timekeepers that people often relied on them for schedule cues. When the goat stands and stretches, go milk it. When the ox lies down, it's too hot to plow. When the rooster crows for the third time, you're late. You also had seasonal clues. The time you rose in summer was different from winter. Longer days meant earlier starts. Shorter days, more sleep. If the cold didn't wake you first. Time itself was elastic, stretched and pulled by weather, planting cycles, and holy days. You didn't wake up at 6 a.m. You woke up when the frost cracked, when the bread needed turning, when the clouds shifted, when the wind changed, or simply when your stomach loudly filed a complaint. Yes, hunger was one of the most reliable alarm systems. No one in 1500 skipped breakfast because they were intermittent fasting. You skipped breakfast because there wasn't one, and then you regretted everything. That dull, insistent gnaw in your belly told you the day had begun, And if you didn't get something in you soon, you'd be harvesting barley on an empty tank. Sometimes, your body itself became a timepiece. After weeks of routine, your internal clock aligned with the world around you. You learned to wake when you needed to because the cost of oversleeping was high lost wages, cold porridge, and public humiliation by your neighbor Marjorie, who absolutely lives to talk about your lateness. There were also smells that acted as alarms. The scent of bread baking at the communal oven meant morning had arrived. The smoke of hearth fires told you the village was stirring. The scent of, something burning meant the apprentice had overslept again. And while we're here, let's talk about gut instinct. People in 1500 weren't dumb. They noticed patterns. They watched the stars, the birds, the wind. They adjusted. They developed what we'd call a temporal intuition, an uncanny sense of what time it was, based purely on context and repetition. You, modern traveler, might be useless without a phone, but back then, you'd learn fast. You'd know when to wake from the shape of the clouds. You'd feel hunger coming from the creak of the oven door. You'd sense the approach of dusk by the way the wind touched your ears. You wouldn't know the time. You'd know the moment. And really, isn't that more beautiful? You look down. The sheep has stopped chewing your boot and is now contentedly sitting on your foot like a woolly alarm clock that's turned itself off. You smile. No bells, no buzzers, no panic. Just nature. Just now, this morning, you don't wake up in a hayloft, or a noble bed, or even next to a determined sheep. You wake up to a bell again. But this one's different. It's not a church bell, though it sounds just as obnoxiously sincere. It's the work bell, rung from the town hall or the local guild hall, and it's saying exactly one thing. Get up or get left behind. You're in a growing market town now, perhaps in the Low Countries, maybe northern Italy, maybe a bustling German trade center. And while we're still in the 1500s, the smell of the industrial age is wafting faintly in the air, mostly from tanneries and brewing vats. Life here moves differently. Unlike rural folk who wake with the sun or monks who wake with God, city dwellers have started to organize time in a new way by task, by labor shift, and by the bell schedule of the economy. The bell rings again. It's the start of day bell, and you know you've got maybe 10 minutes before the master mason begins shouting about apprentices who think time is a suggestion. The town has adopted a system simple, effective, mildly terrifying. The first bell rings just before sunrise. That's the rouse bell. The one that tells bakers, butchers, tanners, weavers, and anyone with debts to repay that they'd better be upright and halfway sober. The second bell rings shortly after. That's the get to work bell. Miss the second one. You're late. Miss it twice. You're replaced. City life in 1500 is fast-paced by medieval standards. There are textile mills powered by water wheels, glassmakers' furnaces that must be tended at precise hours, and merchant caravans that leave on a rigid schedule. Bell or no bell, time, here, is starting to harden into something less fluid. You don't just wake when it feels right. You wake because someone is counting on you, and probably yelling about wool. Some workshops even have their own bells, rung by the guildmaster or apprentice who drew the short straw. In larger towns, night watchmen blow horns or ring handbells to indicate the changing of the watch, which also signals the transition between sleep and early labor. You hurry through the streets, past stalls being erected, past grocers laying out last night's bread, past a man snoring on a cart who is definitely going to be fired. Above you, bell towers glint in the morning light, chiming in call and response like a choir of brass accountability. Time is becoming a tool of coordination, and with it, waking up has become a responsibility. Notably, in a few early manufactories, yes. Even now, in the late 1500s, you see something new shift work, especially in mining towns, where operations run near constantly, and in ports where tide schedules trump human convenience. Waking up is no longer tied to daylight. It's tied to the job, the schedule, and the whistle or bell, or boss. These early pre-factory systems are foreshadowing something big: the rise of mechanical timekeeping. There are rumors distant, strange rumors that some noble households have clockwork alarms, where weights and levers drop stones or ring small chimes at specific hours. They are expensive, complex, and prone to setting themselves on fire, but they exist. One merchant you meet even claims to have seen a clock that could ring a bell at set times automatically. You call him a liar, but make a mental note to keep an eye on the future. Still, for the vast majority, bells rule. And not just for starting the day. There are bells for midday break, often signaled with a louder tone or different pitch. Afternoon resumption, for those who dozed off under a wine barrel. Evening curfew, when the streets must be cleared and fires banked. And emergency bells, which send everyone running or looting, depending on your moral compass. The effect: time becomes audible. You don't need a clock if the entire world chimes around you. You wake, eat, labor, pray, rest, and sleep to the rhythm of the bell, and in many ways, it's comforting. The day has shape. The city has voice. You're never unsure what you're supposed to be doing, only how late you already are. You head into the workshop, where the forge glows and the foreman is already scowling. You nod to your fellow apprentices. One is still chewing breakfast. Another has chalk in his beard. You're all here, thanks to the bell. No alarms, no apps, just the sound of responsibility, echoing off every stone wall. And when the day ends, there'll be another bell, another sigh, and a slow march home. You'll collapse into sleep knowing that before long, it will ring again and you will rise. Not because of a snooze button, but because the city called and you answered. This morning, your body wakes up naturally, but your mind wants to know: is it early? Is it late? Did I sleep too long? Am I cursed? You turn your head, squint at the corner of your wooden shelf, and see it a bowl of water with a stick in it. This is your alarm clock now. Welcome to the DIY timekeeping technology of the 1500 sun clocks, water clocks, oil clocks, and mildly dangerous fire-based gadgets. Because if you lived in a world before smartwatches and sleep trackers, and if bells, roosters, servants, and elbow-poking monks weren't quite enough for your lifestyle, you had one last option. Build time yourself. Let's start with the simplest, the sundial. Sundials had existed for millennia, but by the 1500s, they had become smaller, fancier, and weirdly portable. Wealthier households kept decorative sundials in courtyards or gardens. Traveling merchants might even carry pocket sundials, foldable, slightly inaccurate, and guaranteed to impress someone at a Renaissance fair. But there's one big problem: they only work when the sun is out. Cloudy no time. Nighttime is dead to you. So indoors, people got creative, huh? Enter the water clock or clepsydra. If you're trying to impress someone while spilling it, these worked on a beautiful principle: drip, drip, drip. Water flowed from one container into another at a predictable rate, often marked with lines or notches to show the passage of time. It wasn't precise, but it was close enough for monks, early scientists, and that one guy in your village who took his herb steeping extremely seriously. Some clocks had floats attached to sticks, so you could read the level like a medieval thermometer. Others used bowls with holes that sank slowly over time, indicating how long you had to finish your porridge before the goat noticed. Water clocks had problems, though. They froze in winter. They overflowed if you forgot them. And they only worked if you had someone willing to refill them every few hours, which means, ironically, you needed to be awake to keep your clock going. You sigh. Modern problems are solved by apps. 1500s problems are solved by refilling your bowl with damp regret. Still, some folks took things further. Let's talk about candle clocks. These were made by placing marks on a large, slow-burning candle. Each mark represented a fixed amount of time, say, 1 hour. As the candle melted down, you could see how much time had passed. Some fancier versions had embedded metal balls that dropped onto a tray with a clang when the wax reached a certain point, turning them into primitive alarm clocks. In theory, this was genius. In practice, well, candles drip, lean, and sometimes fall over and set your bed on fire. So this wasn't exactly bedtime friendly. Still, if you were a scholar working late, or a monk keeping vigils, or a deeply anxious baker, candle clocks were a respectable if slightly flammable option. Another innovation: oil clocks, which burned through marked oil levels like a wick-based countdown timer. Very popular in the Islamic world and parts of Asia. These had started to spread into parts of Europe, though they remained rare, delicate, and mostly symbolic unless you had serious coin. And if you were really fancy, you might own a mechanical clock. By 1500, mechanical clocks existed in monasteries, town squares, and extremely wealthy homes. These were weight-driven, gear-filled, beautifully handcrafted marvels, also known as incredibly expensive furniture that tells you it's already too late. Some even had automata, little moving figures that rang bells, danced, or dramatically pointed at you when you failed to get out of bed. But these were more for prestige than practicality. For the average person, the most useful clock was probably a line in the dirt and a shadow. You think that's a joke? Not at all. Farmers marked stones, walls, and trees to track the sun's movement. A well-placed stick, if you knew how to read it, could give you an almost hourly breakdown, at least until a child or goat knocked it over. So here you are. It's 1500, you have a dripping bowl, a wobbling candle, a rooster who may or may not be late, a town bell that rings when it wants to, and your own internal clock, guided by hunger, cold, and fear of missing your job. You squint at your water clock. The bowl is half full, or half empty. But either way, you're up. Because in this world, time doesn't ask politely. It leaks, it drips, it burns slowly, and it taps on your window with a stick. And somehow, that's enough. This morning, you're not in a drafty village hut. You're in a manor, surrounded by carved wood panels, imported tapestries, and a 4-poster bed that could double as a stable. Congratulations, you are now rich, possibly titled, and definitely incapable of waking up like a normal human being. And why would you? Your aristocracy, darling. Your waking experience is no longer shaped by roosters, bells, or blunt elbows to the ribs. No, your mornings are orchestrated like a court ballet, choreographed down to the precise temperature of your footbath and the angle of the sun through your stained glass window. First, the valet enters softly, reverently, as though your slumber is a sacred rite. He announces the time, or something vaguely like time. The sun is nearly past the third rose window, my lord, and opens the drapes just enough to let in a golden ray of filtered reality. Then come the servants, one with warm water, one with your linen shift, and one with today's complaints about the kitchen boy. You do not sit up yet. That would be undignified. You are gently urged into wakefulness by the aroma of spiced porridge, the sound of someone tuning a lute in the hallway, and the reluctant acceptance that you are expected to be present at morning prayers or, worse, a breakfast meeting with your estate steward. Your day is scheduled, not by clock, but by ritual. The rich in 1500 didn't live by minutes, they lived by moments and expectations. Morning routine, more like morning theater. If you're royalty, this reaches operatic levels. Kings and queens in the 1500s were awakened by lev ceremonies, formal rituals where courtiers gathered to watch them get dressed. Yes, waking up was a public event. You opened your eyes to dozens of nobles politely pretending not to notice your bedhead. Imagine being woken by someone announcing the Duke of Artois has arrived, and he brought your underpants. You begin to miss the rooster. Still, nobility had other ways of tracking time. You might have a personal sundial, a private bell rung by your chaplain, or even a rare, ornate mechanical clock imported from Italy or Augsburg. These clocks weren't terribly accurate, but they were impressive, and that's what mattered. If your guests see you own one, they'll assume you also know what time it is, and that's half the battle. Breakfast itself is served only when you descend, which may happen at 8 a.m. or 10 a.m. or after your third dream about dueling with a goose. No one questions you. That's what rank is for. And when you do emerge, you're met with a servant with a detailed agenda, hunting, inspecting lands, attending mass, glaring at rival nobles. A scholar with your astrological chart, because no one plans a morning without checking Mars. And someone holding a plate of quail eggs with wild garlic, which you will refuse dramatically and then eat anyway. If you are a noblewoman, your morning may involve hair arrangements, wardrobe consultation, and possibly receiving letters delivered by your steward while you pretend not to care that your cousin married up. If you're a merchant lord, your apprentices and scribes arrive early, bearing ledgers and bills and politely murmuring about rising tariffs. You nod while thinking mostly about cheese. If you're a member of the clergy elite, your morning begins in Latin. You are expected to be alert, devout, and possibly fasting, though not so much that you faint during a reading of Leviticus. But even among the rich, not everyone wakes easily. Some employ creative methods. Perfumed cloths wave gently near the nose. Songbirds kept in covered cages until morning. Or servants trained to hum calming madrigals just outside the bedroom door. One Italian noble reportedly trained his monkey to rattle a chain at first light. You reflect on this while sipping wine for breakfast and wonder if the monkey unionized. All this is to say, for the rich in 1500, waking up was a curated experience. Not just because they could afford it, but because every part of their day was bound to social display. Sleeping late could be seen as indulgent or weak. Waking early dressed, composed, and pretending to enjoy eel porridge was a status symbol. So when your valet bows and murmurs, "Shall I fetch the master of the hunt?" my lord, you nod, rise, and pretend you weren't just dreaming about being a baker with no responsibilities. Because in this world, you may not need an alarm clock, but you're definitely on someone else's schedule. And the monkey is watching. This morning, you're no longer a noble reclining in silk sheets. You are now a peasant. Specifically, a hard-working, underfed, mildly overworked villager with cracked hands, a mysterious cough, and a goat that keeps eating your laundry. Your mattress is straw. Your pillow is a bundled tunic. Your blanket is optimism and one aggressively lumpy wool sheet. And yet you are already awake. Why? Because you had to be, always. In 1500, peasants didn't need alarm clocks. They had duty, hunger, and the extremely motivating sound of someone else doing your job before you got to it. You wake before the sun, before the rooster, before Marjorie starts hollering about the pig again. Because if you don't, the bread oven will be taken. The communal well will be crowded. The Lord Steward might arrive and decide today's a great day for extra labor. And worst of all, your neighbor Thomas will say, sleeping in again. We must be nice." Which is medieval for "you're dead to me" on. Peasant mornings started with necessity, not preference. The day's labor dictated the wake-up call. Planting, you rise with the frost. Harvesting, you're up before the first light to beat the heat. Haymaking, you've already been out there for 20 minutes, swinging a scythe and mumbling regrets. For women, mornings were even earlier. They were often responsible for starting the fire with wet wood and no matches, preparing porridge, feeding livestock, milking the cow, shoving their husband into pants, and sometimes working in the field afterward, all before sunrise. For children, the wake-up call was less about time and more about volume. A mother's voice yelling from the hearth had a way of tearing through dreams like a divine trumpet. Bonus points if you were awakened with a wooden spoon tapping the bedpost. And yes, children worked too, feeding animals, fetching water, gathering kindling. Childhood in 1500 was less magical wonder years and more small adult internship. The architecture of your home didn't help either. Most peasant houses were one-room structures, maybe two if you were lucky. That means once someone was up, everyone was up. There was no sneaking in one more hour. There were no "I'm not a morning person" excuses. There were pigs in the kitchen, smoke in the rafters, wind coming through the door, and a grandmother loudly praying at full volume next to the fire. And if you didn't get up, you paid the price. That price could be missing your turn at the communal oven, forcing you to eat yesterday's bread again. Being late for corvée labor, where you worked on the Lord's land for free and he noticed if you were slow. Losing your spot in line for the mill, which meant no flour, no food, and no forgiveness. Worse still, oversleeping could earn you a reputation. You didn't want to be known as someone who sleeps like a rich man. That was an insult. Laziness wasn't just mocked, it was suspected. If you weren't out in the fields at first light, people assumed one of the following. You were sick. You were cursed up. You were pregnant. You were hiding something. You were possibly a witch. It was easier just to get up, That said, peasants weren't machines. They, too, had rhythms. Many worked with the sun rising at first light, breaking for midday, returning for late afternoon work, and then going to bed early. Their bodies, worn by labor and governed by habit, adjusted naturally. There was no need for devices. Their internal clocks were trained by hardship. Still, a few clever tricks existed. Some might leave shutters slightly open, letting light pour in as a natural wake-up. Sleep with tools nearby, so the first thing they touched reminded them what they had to do. Or rely on the first stirrings of livestock, which were basically furry little alarm clocks with attitude. And while the gentry might wake to harp music and a servant's whisper, the peasant woke to a cow stepping on their foot, the baby crying, smoke from the hearth, or a chicken sitting on their face. You rise, stretch, throw on your patched tunic, and open the door. It's still dark, but the sky is starting to silver. A cart rolls by. A neighbor nods. A dog barks. A baby howls. The village is already alive, and you'd best keep pace. Because in this world, you don't need an alarm clock. You have something far more persuasive. The immediate consequences of not getting out of bed. You wake in darkness again. But not because of work, not because of chores, not even because a pig sat on your head. This time, you wake because God expects you to. It's matins, the night office, the first of the canonical hours. And if you're a monk, a nun, or even a devout townsperson, you are already late. The bell rings from the chapel tower low, echoing, insistent, not melodious, not friendly. It sounds exactly like what it is, a summons from eternity. You swing your legs out of bed, clutch your robe, and make your way silently down cold stone steps, candle in hand. All around you, others shuffle from their cells like holy ghosts. No one speaks. No one yawns. Everyone is already halfway to prayer. Because in 1500, time belongs to God and waking up was often a religious obligation. Let's start with the monks. In monasteries across Europe, monks followed the rule of Saint Benedict, a strict schedule that divided the day into 8 prayer sessions, including several during the night. Matins sometime between midnight and 2 a.m. Lauds around dawn, and on through prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. That meant waking in the dead of night, standing in a freezing chapel, chanting psalms with cracked voices and bleary eyes, all because discipline and devotion were the pillars of your existence. And how did they wake up? Mostly through the same method as you, a bell, rung by the appointed brother who had the worst luck that week. That bell might sound from a central tower or be rung manually by a sleepy novice with a rope, a candle, and no joy in his heart. Some monasteries had water clocks or candle alarms to keep track of prayer times. Others relied on experience. The watch monks would estimate when to ring the bell based on the stars, the wind, or, occasionally, divine anxiety. And they didn't just get up to pray. They got up to sing. Matins and lauds were often sung in full plainsong, filling the dark with voices echoing through stone vaults. The cold, the effort, the fatigue, it was all part of the point. Waking up when your body least wanted to was seen as a spiritual offering, a victory over sloth, and a gesture of humility. Nuns followed similar routines, often more isolated and more rigid, especially in enclosed orders like the Poor Clares. Their mornings began in silence, shadows, and soft candlelight, chanting to the same God through gritted devotion and wooden floorboards that never stopped creaking. But even outside the monastery, waking for worship was a part of daily life. Towns and villages rang church bells not only for morning mass, but for Angelus prayers, feast days, fast days, and liturgical hours. The sound of the bell wasn't just a reminder, it was a clock in God's voice, announcing time not as a schedule, but as a sacred rhythm. In some towns, public prayers were said at sunrise, and those who didn't show up were fined or publicly shamed. In others, guilds required their members to attend morning mass before beginning work. Skipping it might result in a penalty, or worse, a lecture. Even children learned to rise for devotion. In cathedral schools or choir programs, boys might wake before dawn to rehearse hymns and perform sacred music as part of their training. Nothing says childhood fun like chanting Latin in a freezing chapel before your first bite of bread. And let's not forget the pilgrims, those pious wanderers who traveled hundreds of miles to holy sites, often rising before dawn to begin their day's march. Their alarm clock's stars, cold feet, and the growing suspicion that someone else had already taken the good spot on the road. In short, if you lived in 1500 and believed in anything, waking up early was part of the deal. Not for productivity, not for capitalism, but because the soul didn't sleep in. Even the architecture helped. Chapels were placed so their windows caught the first light of sunrise, flooding the altar with gold and pink, announcing that God was awake, and you should be too. You finish your morning prayers, your knees ache, your voice is raw, but you feel calm, even holy. Outside, the sky is still dark, but the edges are softening. Dawn is near. And as you shuffle back to your cell, or home, or bakery, you realize in this world, waking up wasn't just practical. It was spiritual discipline, a training of the soul, a way of saying, I choose to rise, not for myself, but for something greater. The bell rings again. Lauds begin. You keep walking. Because once you're awake, you might as well pray. This morning, you don't wake up. You're still lying in bed, breathing, but unmoving. Someone shakes you gently. You groan, turn over, and mutter something about bread. Again, you're shaken. This time more firmly. A voice whispers, "He's not waking. Should we fetch the priest?" Uh-oh. In 1500, not waking up didn't mean you hit snooze too many times. It meant something was wrong, and depending on where you lived, that something could be anything from natural causes to witchcraft, demons, or the wrath of a saint you forgot to thank. Let's break it down. Sometimes, you didn't wake up because you were sick. Fevers, infections, and exhaustion from backbreaking labor often led to deep, unnatural sleep. When someone slept through dawn, breakfast, the noon bell, and possibly a chicken attack, people got worried. Sleep was supposed to be light, responsive, cyclical. Oversleeping was considered a symptom not of laziness but of something sinister. The sleeping sickness, now thought to be encephalitis or other neurological conditions, could cause victims to slip into days-long unconsciousness. Fevers from the plague, malaria, or typhus could knock someone out hard and fast. Malnutrition or even lead poisoning from pewter dishes sometimes led to sluggishness or comas. In such cases, You might be dosed with vinegar, herbs, or holy water. You'd be rubbed with onion or garlic. Or worse, someone might slap you and say, "Don't go to God yet. You still owe rent." But sometimes it wasn't sickness. Sometimes it was superstition. There are stories recorded in village chronicles and whispered in smoke-filled taverns of people who didn't wake because they had been visited in the night. By what? Take your pick. A night hag who sat on your chest and stole your breath. A witch who spirited away your soul for a nightly ride to a sabbat. A demon who tempted your spirit away and left your body cold. Or even a changeling, swapped by fairies while you slept, especially if the sleeper woke. Different. If you did wake eventually, but with a headache, strange dreams, or paralysis, it might be assumed that something dark had brushed past your bed. To prevent this, many kept protective charms near their sleeping space. Iron scissors under the pillow, St. Benedict medals, garlic braids, or even scratched symbols into the bedframe runes, crosses, stars. In Eastern Europe and parts of Italy, people told stories of sleepers being ridden by invisible spirits, sometimes benign, often mischievous, always exhausting. If you woke up sore and breathless, it wasn't your mattress. It was them. Even medical texts of the time couldn't decide whether deep sleep was a blessing or a curse. Some described long sleep as God's mercy, letting the body heal. Others warned of melancholic slumber sleep that dragged you away from life. Spirit first. And if someone didn't wake at all, you lit candles. You called the priest. You prayed. Because death didn't come quietly, it came through sleep, through dreams left unfinished, and bodies left still beneath woolen sheets. Of course, not all unwaking was dramatic. Sometimes, people were just tired. But even then, oversleeping risked public humiliation. Did you hear old Henry slept past the morning bell? Must be nice to have the devil for an alarm clock. He must have drunk a witch's brew or 12. Being known as someone who overslept could mark you as lazy bad, possessed worse, or possibly French unspeakable, which meant people often pretended to wake up on time even if they were dead tired. You sat up. You grunted something righteous. You splashed water on your face and muttered about the cows. Because sleep was private, but not waking was everybody's business. And finally, there were those rare, unsettling stories of collective sleep villages where several people fell into strange comas at once, usually blamed on bad air, spoiled food, or divine punishment. These incidents added to the growing suspicion that sleep was a fragile state easily disturbed by the natural and supernatural alike. You stir now. Someone's whispered a prayer over you. You're groggy, sore, and you smell vaguely of onions. But you're alive. You're awake. The rooster is crowing. The bread is burning. And the town bell is ringing. You blink. You breathe. And you rise. Because in 1500, waking up wasn't just expected, it was a triumph. The bell rings again. But this time, something's different. You stir in your straw bed, or perhaps your velvet-draped canopy, and instead of cursing the rooster, the candle, or your neighbor Marjorie, you find yourself imagining something strange. What if waking up didn't have to be random? What if it didn't depend on bells, beasts, Or the annoying sunlight that blasts your eyeballs open like divine punishment? What if you could choose exactly when to wake up? In 1500, such an idea bordered on science fiction. But somewhere, perhaps in a workshop in Nuremberg or a monastery library in Prague, a tinkerer was already trying to make it real. Let's talk about the future. The very first mechanical alarm clocks are just around the corner. In fact, records show that as early as the late 15th century, inventors were tinkering with adjustable mechanical devices, a gear here, a pin there, trying to create a clock that wouldn't just tell time, but respond to it. One famous example: Levi Hutchins, a New Hampshire clockmaker, built a personal alarm clock in 1787, a full 287 years after your current muddy morning. It only rang at 4 a.m. because Levi was a maniac, but still, it was a start. But even before Hutchins, Europeans were dreaming. In Renaissance Italy, Leonardo da Vinci sketched ideas for intricate timekeeping gadgets. He saw the world as a machine of interlocking rhythms, and he understood that one day, humans would want to master time itself. And what about China? Centuries before the 1500s, Chinese inventors had already created water-powered clocks with alarm bells. These were complex, beautiful, and largely for emperors and scholars, but they showed that people everywhere wanted the same thing: to control when the day began, to own their mornings, to wake without guessing. It wasn't just about convenience, it was about freedom. Because let's face it, throughout history, most people didn't choose when they got up. They woke because they were told to, because something screamed, because someone shoved them, because they'd starve if they didn't. The idea of personal agency over time was radical. And yet, it's coming. Soon, the rise of the middle class, urban professions, and eventually the Industrial Revolution will demand stricter schedules. Workers will need to arrive at textile mills at exact hours. Trains will run on precise timetables. Shops will open and close on the minute. And that's when alarm clocks stop being luxuries and become necessities. By the 19th century, factories will have knocker-uppers, people paid to wake workers by tapping on their windows with long sticks. No. Seriously. Imagine being jolted from sleep every morning by a man with a pole and poor aim. Eventually, alarm clocks will flood the market, wind-up ones, bell ringers, electric buzzers, and one day, snooze buttons. Glorious, seductive snooze buttons. You don't know it yet, but your distant descendants will wake in warm beds, hit a glowing button, and enjoy 9 more minutes of bliss before being reminded that life continues to require pants. They'll laugh at the idea of roosters and candles, church bells and goats. But maybe, just maybe, they'll miss something. Because while alarm clocks bring order, the 1500s gave you rhythm. You woke to light, to wind, to the feel of the world shifting. You rose with the village, the forest, the field. And as much as people today love the idea of setting a precise 6:45 a.m. wake up, they also set 5 backups, whisper just 5 more minutes, and dream of mornings where waking up meant following the sun, not a machine. So as the bell rings one last time, clear, slow, and fading into birdsong, you sit up and smile. You don't need an alarm clock. Not yet. You just need the world to whisper. It's time. And now, as the world around you slows and the night wraps softly around your shoulders, We close the shutters on a time before snooze buttons, smartphone alarms, or that one weird ringtone you've been meaning to change for 3 years. You've traveled across centuries, slipped into a dozen uncomfortable straw beds, and miraculously woken up without once checking your notifications. Well done, time traveler. But before you drift off, let's pause together. Let's linger in the gentle hum of history and reflect on what it all meant. Waking up in 1500 wasn't a solitary act, it was part of a communal rhythm, a choreography of sound and sunlight and obligation. You woke because your neighbors were stirring, or your livestock were restless, or because God demanded you sing in Latin at 3 a.m. for reasons no one fully explained. You didn't ask. How many hours of REM did I get, you asked. Did someone steal the bread oven again? Or why is Thomas already in the field? And why is he shirtless? The act of waking wasn't private, it was public, often loud, occasionally embarrassing, and thoroughly woven into the world around you. And there's something oddly beautiful about that. In a time before mechanical timekeepers, humans found ways to rise with the sun, with bells, with birds, with instinct. They woke because life demanded it, because work waited, because devotion called, because the bread wouldn't knead itself and the cows definitely wouldn't milk themselves. Although someone probably tried to teach them, likely Thomas, still shirtless. The idea of morning was flexible, seasonal, and contextual. It didn't hit at 6:30 sharp with a synthetic beep, it unfolded. Gradually, like the mist rising off a field or the slow warmth crawling across a wooden floor. And for the rich mornings were performances, a velvet-draped ballet of attendants, robes, and overly dramatic egg requests. For the monks, they were acts of obedience, cold feet on stone, candlelight flickering in a silent chapel, the rhythm of chants echoing through sacred air. And for the peasants, mornings were necessity, the kind that crept into your bones, whispered into your sleep, and poked you awake with a sense of urgent, unromantic survival. The remarkable thing, no one needed a machine to do it. Instead of alarm, they had habit. Instead of time, they had light. Instead of apps, they had bells, roosters, cold drafts, and responsibility. And in all of this, there's a lesson worth carrying into your own life, especially now, as you lie there, phone face down, eyes fluttering toward rest. The people of 1500 didn't fight the morning. They moved with it. Sure, they grumbled, they groaned. They may have cursed the rooster or the monk or Marjorie's incredibly loud laundry ringing. But they belonged to the morning, and the morning belonged to them. There's a softness in that, a rhythm we've almost forgotten. A way of waking that didn't begin with blue light and cortisol, but with light shifting through shutters and the sound of a pot being stirred in the hearth. So maybe tomorrow, if you can, let yourself wake slowly. Let the light in. Notice the silence. Stretch before you scroll. Breathe before you check the forecast or the news or that email from Brenda marked urgent in all caps, even though it never is. And maybe, just for a moment, imagine yourself in a stone cottage, or a monastery cloister, or a noble bedchamber with an absurdly overqualified valet and a breakfast that smells like regret and roasted chestnuts. Let your morning belong to you. Because time, like sleep, like history, isn't something we chase, it's something we join. You've walked through the lives of monks and merchants, bakers and barons. You've stood under bells, crouched beside candles, shivered in hay, and heard the world whisper, "It's time." Not because a device told you, but because you were ready. And now, as your eyes grow heavier and your breathing evens, remember long before alarms, we had rhythm, ritual, and the ever-faithful persistence of morning. It always comes, not in a blare, but in a beckoning. So sleep well, my friend. You've earned it. The world will still be here when you rise. And if you're lucky, there won't be a chicken on your face.